Hey everybody, and welcome to day 3 of the 5-day character development challenge. I am Haley, your host, and I'm really excited you guys are here because today we are going to be focusing specifically on character introductions, and this should be a lot of fun. So if you're just now joining us, make sure that you go back and start on day 0. Don't start here on day 3 because obviously it's day 3. You want to start on day 0. That's going to give you the best experience. But go ahead, subscribe if you guys haven't already. And whatever it is you're drinking today, grab a cup, cozy up, and let's get to writing. All right, so far in this challenge, we have been working on building up the personalities of each of our characters, which is really awesome because I'm hoping that at this point you're feeling really strongly about those. You know exactly what direction you want each of these character personalities to be going. So now today, when we're focusing on character introductions, once again, we are going to be focusing on personalities and how to make sure that their introduction really introduces who they are and not just what they look like. That's a very strong distinction. Tomorrow we are going to be working on appearances, which of course matters, but not nearly as much as having your reader develop a connection with that character. So today we're going to be focusing specifically on their introductions and using the personalities that we've been building over the last 3 days to really introduce those characters. So this is also the last day of the challenge when we're going to be seeing our lovely cast of my 5 new friends. So enjoy them while they're here. They are not going to be here for the next 2 days, but they are here to help us out today with character introductions. Because if we want our characters to be remembered, they have to have some sort of an impact. And it's critical that we get across who they are at their very first introduction, because that's one of the things that's going to make sure your readers don't forget them, and they won't if your characters have a strong personality that your reader felt and somehow connected with. They're either going to remember, oh, that was the person who infuriated me, or that was the person who actually got a real life laugh out of me while I was reading the book, or that was the person who I feel so bad for. We want to have that connection to each of the characters, because your reader will remember that much more than they'll remember what that character looked like. If that's how we introduce them, this is who they are, this is what they look like, then the reader is like, it's in one ear and out the other, at least in my brain it is. So we want to avoid that by having strong character introductions that include the personality as much as possible. So we're gonna go ahead and dive right in. Our homework today is we're going to write out, of course, who the character is, what their personality is, and then I want you to focus on 2 things. Normally we have more than that, but this one today is just 2. So I want you to really think about the first impression that you want the reader to have of this character. So, you know, if it's our funny character, I'm hoping the first impression that you want is for the reader to be laughing and find them funny and enjoy them. That is the emotion and the reaction that we're going to be looking for. And actually, this is going to go back to one of the things we talked about earlier in the challenge, which is that none of these personality traits are inherently negative. It is the impression that you build into the reader that is going to be either positive or negative. Any of these 5 traits, I could still make a reader fall in love with any of these 5, or you know what? I could actually make the reader hate any of these 5, just depending on the circumstances. You guys have to remember that. And so one of the key things we have to figure out in our introduction is, what impression do we want to give the readers? Do we want the readers to like, dislike, fear them? Whatever it is, we're going to write that one down first, and then we're going to kind of come up with what our character introduction is going to be, and in the best way possible is going to get across that impression that we want. Okay, so with Margot, let's say that the impression that I want the readers to have of her is maybe a little bit intimidating. I want them to be a little fearful and wary of her. Remember, she's the aggressive character. We could go multiple ways with this, but let's say that's the direction that I want to go. That's the impression I want to give. So our introduction would be something like, I could have the main character, who's not Margot, walking in for an interview, right? And she overhears, Margot's talking to this other person, and, you can see in her body language that she's a no-nonsense kind of woman. But then we have the main character overhear her saying, make sure that those numbers are published or you're fired. And maybe the second person is saying, but that'll put the competition out of business. And Margot will say, perfect, put them out of business, then we'll steal all their talent. Like, That's going to be the very opening of Margot. We know she's aggressive now, but we've also built that impression into the reader that she's intimidating and somebody to be kind of wary of. You know, you really don't want to mess around with her. So the next person then is going to be Lisa. She's our funny character, remember? So it's not enough to just say she's funny. We need to show it. So let's say, okay, what impression do I want the reader to have? I want them to have the impression that Lisa is awesome to have around. I want the reader to crave more of Lisa. So to do that, I would need to give her some sort of an introduction into the story that makes the reader love her, which obviously I want to do with her being hilarious. My thought would be that we have a main character who's not Lisa, who's out on a first date and she keeps looking around and her date's like, "What are you looking for?" And she's like, "My sister Lisa, I know she's here spying on me, but she promised I wouldn't see her tonight, but I know she's here." And the guy looks around and then all of a sudden, like, they get back to their date and 5 minutes later, somebody comes walking in and her date goes, "I bet that's her walking through the door right now." And the main character slowly turns around and sees somebody coming into the restaurant wearing a T-Rex costume. And it's her sister Lisa, which, if you guys can picture someone coming into a restaurant in a T-Rex costume to spy on your date, I don't know if you find that as funny as I do, but I think I could maybe deliver it a little bit better if I had the time to write it out. But I would definitely do something along those lines. Nonetheless, as long as it is delivered well and it does actually get the reader laughing, they will love Lisa for the rest of the book. Doesn't matter, because she had that really strong first impression. That's what we're going for. So with Larry, a strong first impression for him maybe would be like rescuing an old woman's puppy before it runs out into traffic, just doing something really good and kind and really going out of his way to do it. That would be a good way to get Larry's introduction into the story. And then next we've got Jennifer. So remember, we want to go first impression. What do we want the first impression to be? You know, I love Jennifer because she's so flirty and fine, but let's say I want the reader to hate Jennifer. Oh, I know what I would do for Jennifer's. I would have some sort of a love triangle going on so that, you know, I've got two characters out on a date, but there's some tension because the guy's kind of been flirting with Jennifer a little bit and his girlfriend is like not having that. And then Jennifer like saunters on over to the table and sits down with them and grabs the cherry off the guy's drink and says, "Oh, I hope you don't mind," and just eats it in front of both of them and just totally intrudes on their date. She's undermining the relationship that they're trying to save. We could absolutely make a reader hate Jennifer based on that context. I love flirty, fun characters, but you could absolutely make them into somebody that the reader's going to love or hate. You just have to be very intentional about it as you're designing their introduction to the story. And then last, of course, we have Brad. And like I said before, you can make this go either way. You could actually make people love him even though he's arrogant if you put the right context in. But for this segment, I'm kind of feeling like Brad's gonna introduce himself to the story by, we might have like a couple characters like laboring on the side of their house. They're sweating, it's hot outside, they're trying to redo siding, and Brad comes by. Of course, he's on his cell phone, but he puts his cell phone down long enough to lecture them on how they're not doing the siding of their house right and how he thinks they should do it, and that he actually doesn't really like the color they picked anyways. Let's talk about a really good way to make the reader not like Brad. If that's the impression that we want to give them first off, that's gonna be a really good way to do it. So before we go on to the homework, I just want to reiterate a couple of things, tips that we should remember. The first one is just that the most important part is making that emotional connection between the reader and the character so that they don't forget who they are later on. And then a tip that I want to leave you guys with is, if you're looking back through work that you've already done, try changing your characters' names. So, you know, save your document before you do this, but run a find and replace on your main characters. So if, you know, if we've got Margot and Lisa are our two main characters of the story, I want to run, you know, Control F and replace them with two other names. So Margot is now Elizabeth and Lisa is now Shalise. So what happens to us as writers is I think we get really attached to the characters we know, and so we get to know them on a really deep basis, and we go into the story almost feeling like our readers have that same connection to them that we do. And so when you do this, when you change their name and go back and read the story again, it's almost like meeting them for the first time. Just that quick name change does it. And then you actually get like a really fresh perspective on what kind of impression you're getting from this new character. Of course, you can always go and change the name back, but that is going to give you actually a really unique view into what your reader is getting when they very first meet that character. So it's almost like you get to meet them again for the first time too, and you can see if you're doing it as well as you think, if you're really establishing a character that people even care about or not. And then of course we have a few things to avoid before we go into the homework, and the first one is just, guys, it all comes back to show, don't tell. So I don't want these introductions to be told. I don't want to be told that the character is funny, that they're aggressive, that they're nice, that they're whatever. So do not introduce what their personality is through conversation by telling us. The really, really crucial part is that it's shown, that we see that Margot is aggressive, that we see that Lisa is funny, and we experience it ourselves because we're intimidated by Margot. We are laughing at how hilarious Lisa is. That is what matters the most, is that we're showing and not telling. And that doesn't mean we can't have any conversations. We definitely need some conversations in the story, like when we had the scene of Lisa showing up in the T-Rex costume. You know, the main characters are having a conversation that leads up to it, but it is a part of the larger scene. It is not them sitting and saying, oh, my sister Lisa is so funny, she is always pulling pranks and is always making me laugh. We are getting that same information, but experiencing it ourselves as Lisa shows up and is hilarious. So you guys should have your worksheets for today. Remember, you can always print off a couple more worksheets if you have more characters that you want to do this for who, you know, didn't fit onto the sheets that we provided. Just print them a couple more times. You're going to write down your character and their personality. You're going to write down the impression that you want the reader to have. This is essential. You want to determine this before you determine what the introduction is going to be, and then come up with a scene, with an idea, not a conversation, not a way to explain who they are, but a scene that shows it. And then once this challenge is over, you can always go back into your work and then insert this as an introduction later. So I want to say thank you again, of course, for joining me today. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And I will see you guys tomorrow for day 4 of the 5-day character development challenge.